free to charge. I'll put it on a Bonetto Centurini.
Do you just have those lying around?
I have one black one. I don't have any 22mm leather.
Let's talk about that. Maybe.
All right.
Maybe. If I don't buy
it's
this.
Pretty sick.
If I don't buy this chronograph.
Maybe we'll just buy it back from each other, like...
Periodically, we get that Seiko itch. Yeah. Hi guys, I'm Patrick.
I'm Adam.
And this is Clock,
Stock, and Barrel.
Offering you a consumer's opinion on everything watch related. And today, we have a comparison between two titans in the industry. Seiko
versus Rolex.
That's right, guys. So we have the 007, the True Bond watch, versus...
The J. Straight from Japan.
The J? Versus the... What is it? Rolex Submariner?
Rolex Submariner. Pre-ceramic.
I'm not a fan of the Sean Connery Bond films.
Well...
They're pretty... They're not... Never mind. I already know that this video is going to get a lot of flack. I'm not going to talk about the Sean Connery Bond films. Very, very dated pieces of art.
All right.
So guys, we are wearing what are honestly the most popular watch for the upper middle class versus the most popular watch for, the
most popular
people.
dive watches in their price segment.
Oh, totally. That is
and if true. Not the two most iconic dive. No, I wouldn't go that far.
What's another iconic diver that you
maybe like the Seamaster? Seamaster Professional.
No. I would say the Seamaster Professional.
But really, when it comes to like low and high,
yes,
value wise, these are the two titans. And in mid tier, that's debatable. So these are really, when you think about it, are some of the most iconic pieces.
Now, a lot of people say that the SKX007 pulls a lot of its inspiration off of the Rolex Submariner, and I'll admit, there's a few aesthetic cues that are similar, but aside from the rectangular shape of the 6 and 9, I don't think these two look that similar. Having collected watches for a long time...
We say that, but show the girlfriend or the average person this.
They'll think it looks the same. But
it's a dive watch.
To me, when I see the 007, and this is what's so alluring about the 007 for me, for the oddest reason, it makes me think about Blade Runner or like sci-fi thrillers. The oddest reason. Like, it's just the aesthetic cues of this watch.
Interesting.
And I don't get that feeling when I see the Rolex, and I suppose that's why I don't think these two look that similar at all.
Right.
However, they are very comparable now, due to aesthetic qualities, not necessarily movement-wise, and that's why we're comparing them for you today. These are very, very popular watches that deserve a lot of attention, and they obviously get it. So we wanted to talk about them on the show today. I've owned numerous SKXs. I've owned the 009. I've owned the 013, I believe, was the mid-size version.
Yep, I had that one
SKX.
Too. A little too small for me, but...
A little too small for me, too. But yeah, we've both owned the SKX, so we're talking from experience here. I've had plenty of experience just checking out Rolexes. I understand. I'm not personally going to buy a Rolex anytime soon. It's not on my list, but Adam's owned a couple of Rolexes, so...
And this is obviously a head-only comparison, because first of all, the SKX came on a horrible, horrible Seiko rubber.
Yeah.
Seiko makes some better rubbers now that are really soft for some of the turtles now.
Yeah.
But that traditional, like, what is it, the Z something?
Z104.
It's Z something rubber is like the worst rubber I've ever felt in my life.
It's pretty bad. It's really stiff. Yeah, so let's just talk about those stock bracelets really quick, because the bracelet options for either of these aren't spectacular, I'll say.
I mean, the Jubilee is super cheap and rattly, but it is so comfortable, for sure.
Yeah, and it's actually, oddly enough, very well received amongst the SKX fan base, and me in particular too, because I actually owned, I've owned some strap code alternative bracelets for my SKXs before, but I actually favored the SKX Jubilee. It's light.
Yeah.
I don't care that it's jangly. I don't know. I never really noticed any sort of issues with noise. It's a very comfortable bracelet. It was easy to size.
Comfort.
And it adds a really good aesthetic to the watch, particularly the 009.
Yeah.
The Pepsi
absolutely.
with the Jubilee, it's just so fun. It's so fun.
And I will say that, the Jubilee might not feel like quality, but when it's on the wrist, it's so comfortable that you don't even think about that
When you look at the head of these watches, we're not there yet, but Seiko does such a good job finishing watches all the way. Grand Seiko down to the bottom line. Like
Yeah.
they just care about the watch.
And guys, this is a pre-ceramic sub, so when you're comparing the new ceramic sub, I mean that oyster bracelet with the glide lock clasp
Oyster Flex
is next level. Like there's no comparison. But the pre-ceramic, which we have today, so we'll kind of compare that as well. They have an old jangly Rolex bracelet too, with hollow end links, and again, it's a pretty crappy bracelet. And it's ridiculous because they sell for like $800, $900, sometimes even $1,000 they're listed for, because it's Rolex, right? But they're super jangly, but super comfortable too. Yeah. So very similar when you compare the pre-ceramic bracelet to an SKX bracelet. I would say the Rolex is a little step above.
The oyster bracelet's arguably one of the most comfortable bracelets I've made too.
Exactly.
And that's I mean, I'm not going to refute that here in this
But the Jubilee is right up there as one of the most comfortable bracelets I think I've ever had.
Well, and it has so many points of flexion. Like, it just wraps around your wrist very, very comfortably. And if you've fitted it right, it's good for when your wrist swells. I mean, they're both really solid bracelets. The metal variants are both really great.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So let's talk about what's inside the watch.
Yeah, so the pre-ceramic sub is a pretty standard Rolex caliber 3000. It has a 48-hour power reserve. It beats 28,000 beats per hour, just like a standard Swiss watch. It's just a workhorse movement. That's all you can really say about it. There's nothing overly complicated or crazy, especially for this one. It's a no-date sub.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that's a workhorse movement.
All right,
because both of these are workhorse movements.
Right, of course.
This is the 7S26. I know because it's on the dial.
Yeah. So this one has a 40-hour power reserve, if I recall correctly. It's either 40, 42.
It's like 40 or 38.
It might even be 38. Yeah. You see different stats quoted. It might be 38.
So guys, this is the polar opposite. This is what the other horse in the stable looks like. Okay, so this watch has a 21,600 beat rate. I believe it's 38 to 40-hour power reserve. It's not hand winding, so you can't wake up and do that. You need to wear it, or it's gonna go to sleep.
As opposed to the Rolex, which is hand winding and hacking.
Oh, I love hand wound watches, guys. Every watch I own has hand wound. It's capable of being hand wound, aside from my F300 Omega.
I do prefer straight up manual wind watches too.
Yeah, because I feel like that part of that is it's just a nice ritual to have. I mean, particularly when I'm picking up a piece that I know I'm going to be wearing periodically throughout the week. It's just part of my morning ritual. I don't know.
It brings you closer to the watch.
And that's one of the things that I found a little stale about the SKX. It is also lacking hacking. You can't hack the watch. So the biggest competitor for the SKX line for being, from being the undisputed champion is the Citizen NY0040.
Yeah.
It's not a ProMaster. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know exactly what
for a little
I had one for a little while, yeah. It has
we'll pull up an image of the watch I'm talking about.
Yeah, very similar watch, but I believe that one was hacking, correct?
It does have hacking now. Yeah. It's not hand wound, but it does have hacking. For me, these watches aren't rated to great levels of accuracy to begin with, so what is hacking really going to do for you? I mean, you're going to... I don't know. So yeah, guys, no hacking, no hand winding, but that's all okay because this lovely little dive watch is only going to cost you about $100. That's not true. You could definitely
$200.
You can get a SKX 007K used.
Yeah.
Maybe luckily well under $200. Right. So price comparison, we've got the SKX007, which is about $200 to $300 depending on the J or K variant. I feel like we talked about this in a previous video, so I won't bother with that now. Or the Rolex.
You got the Rolex, which these pre-ceramic 14060s are going for, on a bracelet, 4.5 up to 5 now. They're starting to actually creep up in value a little bit. So, pretty substantial price difference with these watches here.
Yeah, and you know what? Again, go with what you like. I mean, I honestly think they're different watches aesthetically. So, and people have both in their collection. You have both in your collection. And we could touch on that at the end of this video, why you felt like it was necessary. Yeah,
that's a great point. We can just even say that right now because I feel like the SKX is a watch on its own. I don't even see it as a homage. There's certain aesthetic cues that differentiate the SKX so much. I mean, you can literally pick apart everything starting from the outside in. The bezel is fully gradiated, so you have those full dots going all the way around, which adds a completely different look to it, right? Which is very signature to Seiko. The plots are maxi plots, so you can see they're so much larger and so much bigger.
So beyond the lume, they're actually painted on the dial, those hour markers.
Yeah.
So the lume is actually just filled into that painted maxi plot, which is really cool. There have been maxi dial
Rolex, like the 5513 has larger plots, but those are also way more expensive. But
also, the chapter ring has minute markings on it.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on for this watch, and it's a day-date variant. You can't find a day-date Submariner.
Right.
So there is that. There is also that.
Even the second hand with the ball at the very, very opposite end with
I've
the
never
white
been
hand.
a big fan of that.
Yeah.
I'm not really a big fan of that. Seiko's been doing it for years, though.
It's true, yeah. It is weird that they loom up the ball when it's the exact opposite side.
I don't know if it's easier that way.
I don't know.
I'm assuming it's because you don't want it to get in the way of the hour and or minute hands when you're trying to look at when you're looking at loom. I don't know.
Yeah, that might be part
Tell
of
us why the lollipop's on the opposite end, guys, for the SKX and a lot of Seiko's range of divers. I'd love to know. I'm actually very confused by it all. I mean, I have a few theories, but anyways.
Yeah.
But while we get down to the nitty gritty here, and another point to add on to what you were saying before we do get to the nitty gritty is that the crown placement is
of course.
very, very different.
Very unique to Seiko as well, of course.
So, bezel action. Why don't we start there?
Yeah, so this is the J. So this is one of the things with SKXs is the actual bezel action is very inconsistent.
Totally different throughout. Yes.
So this one, I don't know if it's because this is a J, but that bezel action is
Did you get this new?
Yeah, I got this brand new.
Okay.
The bezel action is really tight.
So
there's some that just ring around the rosy like crazy,
There's absolutely no play. It's funny, we joked on it earlier.
Yeah.
In an earlier video with the Sin U1.
Oh, yeah.
Just the Seiko line of having loose bezels. And I've only ever owned the Malaysian or the K variant.
Yeah.
It's also, sometimes they source the movement from Singapore and it's made somewhere else. Lord knows, like their production is big. So I don't blame them for not making everything in Japan. But certainly the fit and feel of this bezel is better than a K. And I can vouch for that. I've owned numerous Turtles, Sumos, SKXs.
Right.
And likewise, I'm sure. But this bezel action is really great. So guys, 1 point for the J. I know that's a separate video, but 1 point for the J in that department. This bezel action is great. And it's actually landing perfectly on the minute mark.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what's really interesting too is the Seiko bezel is actually easier to grab than the subs bezel. The sub bezel is a little bit tighter, but instead of just sort of grabbing onto the edge, since the SKX bezel is a little bit taller, you kind of have to push down on the Rolex to get a good grip on it. Whereas the SKX, you can just grab that coin edge bezel and start turning it right away.
That's interesting. Yeah, and I've noticed that too, and it's the same with all the homages. It's a different action. It's a different, and someone argued that this is better. So far as, if you're just trying to keep track of time within a 60-minute interval, this is going to be better. But if you're diving, I would imagine that this would be operationally better because it is a lot more difficult to turn. It's not impossible to turn, but it's a lot more difficult to turn. And
Much tighter
if my
action.
hands were wet, or if I was in a wetsuit, this would be extremely difficult to turn.
Yeah.
But it does take the pressure along with the turn to get it to go. It's not like there are systems that where you have to push the bezel down to turn it. That's not what we're saying.
Right.
It's easier to have it turn that way because there's not as much to grip onto.
Exactly.
But speaking of the bezels, it's undeniable that the insert for the Submariner is worlds above the SKX here. Like it's just a very, very refined. I love how they've done the numerals. I love the lume pip at 12 o'clock. The lume pip is very bright, even on yours still. Mm-hmm. You've got this sunken. I believe there's actually Hardlex crystal covering the lume pip here. Fun fact. You can kind of see it there. But it's an interesting feature. I like how it is, gradiated all the way through.
Yeah. All those individual dots all the way around.
I don't know. Particularly, I do like that style, but there's just a really nice, clean aesthetic to the Submariner's bezel insert. So yeah, no real. It's interesting competition on this point. I would say that turnability goes to the SKX. However, aesthetic and probably operational quality, if you're a diver, gonna go to the Submariner.
Yeah.
Talk about those crowns really quick. So Rolex has developed a really interesting crown system.
Yeah, they have the triple lock crown system, and we can show right now actually.
Sure.
The 3 dots or the 2 dots signify the It's 3 dots signify the triple lock crown, and you can kind of see. I'll just kind of pop it out for you guys. You can see the gasket. Let's see if we can try and focus there. There you go. So you can see the gasket that's actually sitting right around underneath the crown, so that when you push it in, it'll be even tighter water sealed. So
check that out though. This is the zero lock.
So there's obviously a huge amount of refinement, a difference in the refinement when you engage and push into the crown with the Rolex versus it's very kind of gritty and grainy.
That's
on
a
the
300 meter
SKX.
diver as well.
And this is a 300 meter diver as opposed to 200. Even though both are ISO certified, which is pretty cool for the SKX being a $200 watch,
There's undoubtedly the action, and I've had this issue with a lot of my Seikos in general across the board. My Sumo was flawless.
Yeah.
But the crown action is really gritty. Don't expect it to be Rolex quality, I suppose is what I'm saying. The crown action on that is very, very smooth, and it has like this very cushiony feel at the end when you're turning it into that last gasket. It's really, really nice. It's very, very pleasant to work with, especially if you do hand wind your watches. It's very fun to do in the morning.
Right.
This, however, this one has a lot of grit to it. And it's not so much, I think it's the threading rubbing on each other, because the spring in there for the crown and the stem is actually pretty strong. And I think it's just pushing up against the threads that hold it in, and I think that's what adds to that grit. It's just not, I don't know, it's not really the execution necessarily, it's just how it's designed. It's not my favorite. Like my turtle, the previous turtle I had, this Patty turtle, it was extremely gritty. Extremely gritty. And, what can you do?
Inconsistencies, with the different SKXs, because they all feel different too. It's kind of interesting to note though, too, the sub is a traditional 40 millimeter size, where the SKX is 42 and a half. What's kind of cool is both have very great classic proportions though in person. But I think, with the symmetry that you find on the no date sub, I mean, this thing is almost just perfection, In that 40 millimeter size, even though they are very similar, I think the 40 millimeter that the pre-ceramic sub came in with the slimmer lugs, I mean, this case is literally perfect on any wrist. Unless you're some gargantuan mammoth with like 8.5-inch wrists, maybe it would look small.
Then you want the SKX. Yeah. I gotta say, I'm not a big fan of how the date window is done on this dial, just speaking of. Like yours is no date. I do, the Rolex is very, very popular for their no date, but equally as popular for that Cyclops sapphire crystal. And what am I trying to say? Notorious for it too. It is a little bit of a smudge magnet. Anytime you have that magnifier, it's sort of a pain in the butt to clean up. If you're
right around the edges and stuff.
Yeah, like when you're cleaning off the crystal, it does a little bit of a nuisance. However, I'm not a huge fan of how the day and date complication is done on this watch. It could be a little bit more refined. Maybe those edges could be a little bit more sunken, a little bit more flush. Or perhaps they could shape it similarly to how they've shaped the 6 and the 9 markers, just to make it blend into the dial more. But as of right now, it stands out so clearly. And when the lume ages, I'm just not a fan. I'm just not a fan of how the day-date complication is done on the...
Yeah. One thing to note too, we forgot...
36, whatever this movement is.
Yeah. 7S26. Yep.
Excuse me.
Hardlex crystal versus sapphire crystal, which a lot of people make a big deal about. Honestly, I don't really care that much.
No.
People are always like, "Oh my goodness, like the MM300 should have a sapphire crystal." Like, well, the Hardlex crystal is created so that it doesn't shatter.
Yeah.
Right? In diving circumstances.
Yeah.
So like that's the whole point. So it's purpose built. So I don't see I've never in my life scratched a Hardlex crystal either.
No.
So I don't. It's softer, but I mean, are you even gonna really? How much softer is it?
You have to really respect Seiko for what they do with their watches. We haven't talked about these cases yet, but a lot of people forget that Seiko makes their own lume. Seiko makes their own crystal. Seiko grows their own quartz crystals to go inside the watches. everything they do, and we talk about German precision, but Seiko's a Japanese brand that really cares about its ingenuity and like making a watch better, you know, and to their own standard. You know, they don't chronometer certify their watches anymore. They have their own standard for grading a watch's accuracy. They have their own standard of lume. They take things seriously when it comes to their watches, and that's very, very commendable. I have no issues with the hardlex on this watch or any of my Seikos in the past. And the way this watch is done, the crystal actually recedes into the body just a little bit.
Yeah, you can get a good shot
just
there.
under the bezel to where it doesn't become an issue. It's also nicely shaped as well. It has this little, I don't know how to call it an infinity edge, but it falls under the bezel around the edges, and you can tell there. Aesthetically, it's gorgeous. And again, I've had sapphire crystal scratch. I don't think I've ever had hardlex scratch, oddly enough. So, you know, maybe that's just my luck, but I've definitely had a lot of my sapphire crystal scratch, and it stinks, guys. Maybe I can run a DIY video on how to get scratches out of sapphire crystal. It's not fun. But at any rate, yeah, it's not a huge issue for me.
Yeah.
But let's go on to cases.
Yeah, one thing I'm just going to point out right off the bat is the holes case. So you won't find this on the newer subs. Right, it's only on the pre-ceramic subs that you'll find holes case, and really any pre-ceramic or Rolexes in general. That's where the holes case was most popular. You know, in like the '90s and prior.
Why did they take it away?
I don't know. You know, I guess Rolex tried to position themselves as more of a luxury brand, but I like the tool aspect that a holes case brings. I would never get a modern sub. I don't think I would always get the pre-ceramic because of the tool-like qualities of the ceramic or the aluminum bezel and the holes case. Because if I was going to get a modern watch for $8,000, I would much rather get like some kind of complication like from a JLC or something like that, right? So I really appreciate the pre-ceramic tooliness.
Yeah.
And what's
Seiko's excuse? Because there's no holes case here.
Yeah,
it's not due to luxury.
Their Prospects line, every single Prospect watch has a holes case.
Yeah, thank you.
But for some weird reason, Seiko, they even have the fat lugs on this Seiko diver, you know, but they just, for whatever reason, decided not to put probably cost, you know.
It's odd. I don't know why either. Maybe it is cost. I can't imagine how difficult it is to just add a drill to the assembly line.
Very true.
Because this is, you know, the SKX line, it's very doubtful they take the same level of care constructing the cases like they do their Grand Seiko line, so why not?
Could be so easy. And then you can see that care, I mean, even when you're looking at the case finishes and the edging, right? That transition from polish to brush from the side of the lug to the top of the lug there, it's not very clean. It's kind of just, you know, once done, sort of like whatever. You know, it's not the same as you'll get from some of these other pieces, or you can see the sharp edging that you might get on this piece with the brushed and polished sides, and then the slight kind of, I guess, what do they call this? Slightly beveled edges, sort of right on the side there. Chamfered, bezeled, whatever. Beveled, whatever you want to call it.
No, this is definitely the ultimate sports case. The sports wash case. There's a reason that Oyster case is so popular. It's just extremely aesthetically pleasing, and it's both well designed and aesthetically pleasing.
And extremely durable as well.
Oh, yeah. Totally. I mean, this is another watch that was made for military purposes as well.
It's interesting how much thinner too the Rolex is, which is, you know, presents itself as a little bit more of a dressy piece potentially when you compare them to you know, some of the thicker pieces. So it is nice that it has a skinnier or thinner body. So
yeah. Well, how thin is the case on the Rolex?
That I have no clue.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, certainly
it can't be more than 12, right?
It's certainly thinner than the SKX. So far as the case design is concerned, overall case design, finish, and quality, obviously it's going to have to go to the Rolex here.
Of course.
However, you know, the SKX is very admirable. It's designed very well. They've tried to finish it to a degree that's nicer than its competition, and it certainly is.
Yeah.
And I think as an entry-level diver, and that's essentially what the SKX is, it's phenomenal. You know, to where a lot of collectors like ourselves desire it. Oddly enough, there is a charm to this watch that's undeniable.
Absolutely.
In any price range. You know, I feel like they could raise the price on this and drop in a different movement and people would go crazy.
Oh, for sure.
You know what I mean?
You know what's interesting too? I mean, like, Rolex, this is considered almost a vintage. This is like new vintage Rolex, right? So part of the price is for the fact that it's a Rolex. Yeah. When this first came out, it was only a fraction of the price of what they trade for now. You know?
Yeah,
It's kind of funny. I mean, if you just took the logos off and you gave this to someone who had no idea about watches, I'm really curious as to what they would say. I really doubt someone would say this is worth like 20, 30 times or the amount of an SKX, you know?
Yeah.
So they're both tool watches in their own right. It comes down to what you as a watch collector kind of want in your collection, how you view Rolex. Obviously, 90% of it is in the name. Maybe like 80, 75% of it's in the name. But it's an interesting discussion to have. You know, everyone's like looking at this SKX versus Rolex. Like, it's not just aesthetic cues that are very similar. You know, they're both workhorses, especially when you're comparing this pre-ceramic sub. Newer ones obviously are a completely different ballgame, completely different league.
No, I wouldn't be fair to compare those two.
Yeah, but it is interesting to compare these two because honestly, I'm going to get flack for saying this, but the Rolex is not that much better than the Seiko SKX, you know? Especially when you're considering price. Am I happy to own this Rolex? Of course. I love vintage Rolex. I'm a collector, you know, at heart. I love owning a piece of history and the greatest dive watch of all time. But the SKX really holds its own, you know?
Yeah.
Besides the movement and some of the inconsistencies that are a huge pitfall in some people's eyes, I think it's a pretty good matchup and it's a realistic conversation you have to have with yourself if you're in the market for a dive watch and you can afford both of them. You know, obviously if you can afford the Rolex, you can afford the SKX, but do I really want
every SKX?
A no-date pre-ceramic sub in my collection? Do I want that charm and that Rolex name and that vintage appeal? Or would I be okay with just getting an SKX, which is still an icon in its own right and still has a lot of, you know, classic proportion and design that make it.
Yeah, it's a great size for a dive watch. It's certainly not too big. Out of all of Seiko's divers, I think this is the most well-proportioned watch.
Agreed.
I really wish...
I think the Marine Master and this are right up there.
Yeah.
They're very similar, especially with the bezel and everything too, and the big maxi plots.
Premium version of this Seiko. Give me a limited edition version of the SKX. Give me something... Reproduce this line in the Prospect series or its own series. Like, you guys realize how popular this is, right?
With a 4R36, drilled lugs, and slightly better finishing, and a better bracelet.
I want
sold $500.
I want a grand movement. I want a spring drive SKX. No date, no date. Spring drive SKX, maxi plot, your best Lumabrite, sapphire crystal to appease everyone, a ceramic bezel insert. Do it up. Do it up.
You can mod these too, which is really cool. A lot of people mod them for fun. So that's another thing you can do. For an extra $100 or something, you can completely customize this with any kind of bezel you want, ceramic or some weird color. And
another thing I forgot to mention is, and I'm sure you've seen it highlighted when I was just tossing this case around, but you'll notice that between the lugs, the case is actually cut so that it's easier. I don't know if you can see it. I'm sorry, guys. Yeah. So it's easier to replace straps or put different options on here. You know, it's not flush against the body. It's actually cut into the side, so you can actually kind of tell there, that little lip coming out. It's actually really nice for strapping on a NATO, strapping on a leather strap.
It's funny you mention that because that's one of Rolex's pitfalls, is that they even start to ruin straps a little bit. You can probably even see a little bit of markings coming on from Rolex, where it's because there is it's just a straight up sharp edge on this one, and it usually, like on my Rolex Explorer 1, I can barely even wear any other leather straps on it. It has to be really very specific, very thin where it joins the lugs.
Yeah, they don't put those spring bars far enough away to where you can casually place it on there, which kind of stinks. But again, and this is actually something that Seiko continues throughout most of their line. It's cut into the side of the case so that you can put on options without worrying about, you know, a leather strap building wear instantaneously. Yeah. Which is really cool. That's just another thing to note about the Seiko case.
Any closing remarks?
Honestly, if we were to choose a winner, there's no. It's
You can't compare.
Yeah,
as hard
yeah.
as it is to say.
Honestly, if money wasn't an object here and both of these watches were put in front of me, just based off the qualities I see in them, I would probably go the Rolex. If I knew nothing about Rolex, I knew nothing about the cost, I'd probably go the Rolex, but it would be really damn difficult. Because the SKX is a good watch.
It's a great watch. That's why so many people with high-end collections still have that SKX beater in the back of their watch box, you know?
Yeah, and I bet that this watch gets more time on a lot of people's wrists than a Rolex.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and what's so great is it's so accessible. You know, I remember there was a huge outcry of people when the SKX line was presumably going to die.
Oh yeah,
and prices shot up. Prices shot up for this watch.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason for that. You know what I mean? It's such an interesting watch with a really interesting heritage. They make quartz-based versions of this watch.
Right.
I'd love to get one.
Some of the older ones too, yeah.
So guys, if you like this video, odds are you like Rolex and Seiko, and that's a good thing. Those are two amazing brands, so good for you.
Give us your thoughts, guys. Let us know if you have both. Maybe you have one or the other. Maybe you have one but you hate the other.
Yeah.
Maybe a Seiko versus Rolex argument will ensue in our comments.
We would love that.
But yeah, just let us know what you think about the SKX. Let us know what you think about our thoughts. Let us know if you think we're complete idiots. Or don't, whatever. Yeah. Just make sure you like the video and you subscribe to us.
Yeah, and share. Always share. If you think this content would be of interest to a friend of yours or someone in your watch community or group, let them see this because we love to start conversations here on the channel. And again, guys, a comment, as Adam says, we love constructive criticism, but we'll take it all. Even compliments. Compliments are great. Those are the best thing to wake up to. But guys, I know this one was an interesting video for you. I honestly think that these two are icons within their own budget range, and they're really, really great watches, and you'd truly be blessed to have either one of them in your collection. What's great for new collectors is that this is highly accessible. Mm-hmm. Totally worth it.
Oh yeah.
You know, what's funny is I was thinking about not ever doing an SKX video because they have just been beaten to the ground. Like, people have talked up and down about the SKX so much, but it really deserves the attention.
Yeah, I agree.
Like, I do not mind plugging Seiko here.
Yeah.
Great work, Seiko. Thank you for this. Rolex, you guys have been doing this for years.
They don't need any thanks.
No,
they got the money in the bank.
Yeah, you guys don't care about it. Seiko, thank you. And you guys, thank you. We'll see you on the next one.
See you guys.